My name is Clara. I'm 32 years old, and for a long time, the hardest thing to say out loud was this: my family is violent in silence. I grew up in a house where no one shouted. Arguments rarely got heated. There were no slammed doors or broken objects, only internal breaks, the kind no one sees, but that crack your soul from the inside. My parents were always praised by the neighbors. So polite, they'd say. Such an exemplary family. My father, with his serious manner and measured speech. My mother, with her hair always neatly tied back, her calm gaze. On the outside, we were flawless. On the inside, it was like living in a museum, clean, orderly, quiet, but completely uninhabitable. I don't know exactly when I realized my pain couldn't be spoken. Maybe it was when, at 9 years old, I walked into the kitchen crying after a fight with my brother, and my mother just said, "Don't make a scene, Clara. The neighbors might hear." That wasn't comfort. It was an order, a rule, the beginning of a silent pact. In here, we don't talk about what hurts. Little by little, I learned there were allowed pains and forbidden pains. Pains you could dramatize, like a bad grade on a math test, and pains you had to swallow whole, like the fact that my brother would shove me against the wall when no one was looking, or my father saying, "A real lady doesn't complain, she endures." I grew up thinking that was strength, that staying quiet was a sign of maturity, that not needing to vent meant I was balanced. Now I know that was a prison, an emotional captivity where every hidden tear only reinforced the bars. Silence shaped who I became. In job interviews, I spoke less than I wanted. In relationships, I accepted more than I could handle. At family birthdays, I smiled at everyone. Even when I felt invisible, I learned to disappear without leaving, to smile without feeling happy, to say I'm fine, like it was my second skin. I remember one night in particular. I was 24. I had just left an abusive relationship that had gone on far too long. I moved back in with my parents, devastated. Deep down, I was hoping for some kind of comfort, a single question, a what happened. But all I heard was, "At least now you have more time to finish your postgrad." In that moment, I understood. They knew. They had always known. But they preferred not to see, because seeing required action, and acting could tarnish the image. And in that theater called family, the script was more important than the truth. That's how silence becomes complicit. It's not just the absence of sound. It's a choice, a mask, a pact to keep the pain within four walls, where it rots and takes root. It doesn't protect the family, it protects the lie. For years, that omission haunted me. At work, I avoided conflict. In relationships, I apologized even for having feelings. In friendships, I never showed too much. Because silence, once it enters, doesn't stay just in your throat. It seeps into your chest, your actions, the way you see yourself, as if speaking were a risk, as if telling the truth meant destroying the little that was left. Today, looking back, I see that silence was more dangerous than any scream, because a scream, at least, expels the pain, but silence turns it into poison. And when I realized that, I realized something else too. That I didn't have to carry that legacy anymore. That I could break the pact. That I could speak, even if my voice shook. That I could write, even if no one read. That I could live, even if it meant disappointing those who always wanted to keep up appearances. The deepest wound of my life didn't come from a slap or an offensive word. It came from what was never said, from what was ignored, from what lingered in the air like a smell that never goes away. But now, I've chosen to breathe different air, because my story doesn't end in silence. It begins the moment I decide to break it. Saying I was afraid of becoming like my father isn't an exaggeration. It's a confession, not because of what he did openly, but because of what he left hidden inside me. My name is Clara, and from a young age I learned to control my anger, to suffocate it, hide it, wrap it in polite words and calculated gestures. I used to be proud of that. I thought it was growth. That because I didn't yell like he did, didn't smash things like he once smashed plates, didn't use words as knives like he so often did, I was immune, free, but I wasn't. Because violence doesn't always repeat in the same way. It adapts. It sneaks in. And if we're not paying attention, it starts wearing our clothes, speaking with our voice, acting through our hands. It was in a relationship that I realized it. My first serious one after college. He was sweet, kind, and I was cold, impatient. When he made a mistake, I didn't yell. I would pull away. I'd use silence as punishment. I'd respond with sarcasm, with a subtle sense of superiority that made him shrink slowly, without even noticing. At the time, I told myself that was self-control, that not exploding was a sign of maturity. But what I was doing was something else entirely. I was hurting without leaving marks, just as I had been taught. And that terrified me, because it was in that mirror that I saw my father. Not in the details, but in the essence. In the way he placed himself above others. In how he twisted the truth. In always being right. In controlling the environment with the weight of silence. It's hard to admit that sometimes we become what we hated most. There are studies. I read them all. as if looking for forgiveness in the pages, that talk about the transmission of trauma across generations, how pain that isn't processed becomes a pattern, how a child who grows up in fear learns to use that same fear as a tool to survive, how victims become agents without even noticing the shift. But what those studies don't always say is that breaking the cycle isn't just a rational decision. It's not just saying, I'm going to be different. It's deeper. It's re-educating the body, relearning how to feel, holding back the impulse to act out of habit, catching the anger before it speaks for you. And it's exhausting, because it requires constant awareness. Breaking a family pattern is like trying to straighten a tree that grew crooked from the roots. You need firmness, patience, and a nearly blind faith that it's worth it. And often, no one applauds you. No one acknowledges it. On the contrary, they call you dramatic, ungrateful, difficult. But not breaking it costs even more. I remember an afternoon when, after a small argument with my boyfriend, I shut the bedroom door hard. It wasn't a slam. It wasn't a scene, but it was firm, intentional. It hurt him, and instantly it hurt me too. I sat on the bathroom floor, curled up, crying. Not because of the fight, but because I saw the beginning of something, an echo. I hugged him afterward. I apologized. I told him where that came from. He didn't understand everything, but he listened. And for the first time, I understood too. It's not enough to promise we won't repeat the past. We have to stay alert. Be careful. Treat anger like a wounded child, not like a weapon. The violence I received became an inheritance. I didn't ask for it, but now it's in my hands. And what I do with it defines what I pass on to those who come next. I chose not to pass it on, even if it means, every single day, having to choose all over again. The memory of that day still visits me in my dreams, sometimes in blurred images, other times with such cruel clarity that I wake up with my heart racing and the feeling that it's all happening again. The room, the desk, the bluish glow of the computer, the open page with the draft of my final thesis, and then the sound of the laptop hitting my head, and the words, "Leech, you don't deserve a future. My name is Clara." And that was the first time I understood, with my whole body, what it means to have your very existence denied by someone who should protect you. The physical violence was quick, the pain sharp, but what stayed was what came after. The emptiness, the silence as he walked out of the room, the feeling of being alone, not just in the house, but in the world. It was my final thesis, the project I had been working on for months, a piece of research that held all my effort, my hope for a new beginning. And there, on the floor, among torn papers and shattered glass, I asked myself if any of it still made sense. It wasn't just about the thesis, it was about what it represented, about what I was trying to build for myself, a future far away from that house, a life with my own signature. And that blow came as a direct response to it, not because of the thesis itself, but because of the audacity to try to succeed, to try to leave. When you grow up hearing you're dramatic, ungrateful, too sensitive, you start doubting your own perception. And when someone smashes your tool of work on your head and tells you that you don't deserve what you're trying to build, it's as if all your doubts gain a voice. Who do you think you are? What makes you think you can be different? You're going to fail. The worst mistake I made back then wasn't trusting too much. It wasn't moving back home temporarily while finishing college. The worst mistake was believing, even for a second, that maybe he was right, that maybe I was a fraud, a parasite, a useless person playing pretend at being someone. That thought, not the blow, was what almost destroyed everything. Because humiliation at key moments doesn't just hurt, it paralyzes. It plants a deep fear, the fear of trying again, the fear of not being good enough, the fear of being exposed as a fraud, even when everything you've achieved is the result of real effort. And that's when the true waste happens. Not when someone insults us, but when we internalize the insult, when we let the distorted view of the one who hurt us become the mirror through which we start to see ourselves. It took me a long time to understand that he didn't hate me. He hated what I represented. The possibility that someone in our family might break the cycle. He needed to believe I was incapable, because admitting my worth would undermine the entire narrative that upheld his own identity, and that's not easy to accept, because part of me still wished it had been different, still wished the recognition had come, that the pride had shown. But one day, and I remember it clearly, something changed. It was when I read the story of a sculptor who created his masterpiece using a cracked block of marble that everyone else had rejected. He said that the imperfection of the material forced his creativity to find beauty where there had only been damage. That hit me deep. Maybe that's what I needed to do. Maybe I didn't have to forget what happened. Maybe my thesis, now irreversibly damaged, wasn't the end, but the rupture I needed. A break that pulled me out of the eternal wait for approval and pushed me into the risk of building something that was mine, in my own way, with my own hands. I rewrote everything. Not the original thesis, but the way I saw myself. I left the house, started from scratch, worked absurd hours, took on smaller projects, slept on a friend's couch for 3 months, and day by day, a small part of me started to breathe again. It wasn't epic, it was painful. Slow, lonely, but it was mine. And now, when I look back, I know that what was destroyed that afternoon wasn't my future. It was the invisible tie that kept me chained to the idea that I needed permission to exist. I didn't need it. I never did. Fear still visits me, but today, it finds a woman who's learned to turn fear into motion, and it's with it, not without it, that I move forward. The thesis I defended was never submitted to the committee. The original document was lost, along with the files of what I believed to be the most important work of my life. But over time, I realized that was never the real thesis. Life has its own ways of demanding our final presentation. And unlike college, it doesn't announce the defense date. It simply places you in front of yourself and asks, in the quietest and most brutal voice, "Do you know who you are? Without them, my name is Clara." And the answer took a long time to come. For a long time, my existence was an effort to please, to prove my worth, to justify my place. Every diploma, every sleepless night, every yes swallowed when I wanted to say no was an unconscious attempt to say, "Look at me. I deserve to be here." But they didn't look. And when they did, it was to judge, to diminish, to contain. So when the violence finally came, and it came from inside the house, I understood. That wasn't an exception. It was the climax, the final punctuation of the narrative I pretended not to be reading, the essence of the dilemma. When the attack comes from within, the scar runs deeper, because it's not just about aggression, it's about betrayal. And not just any kind, the primal kind. Betrayal by the ones who were supposed to care. But here I am, still with a few marks, still with a few fears, but whole. Because what life asks of us is not perfection. It's presence, it's courage, it's the willingness to step out of the shadow of others, even if it means walking alone for a while. And you know what's most beautiful? It's realizing that by doing so, solitude becomes space, and space becomes home. Today, I understand that my true thesis wasn't about the academic topic I had chosen. It was about me, about breaking free from conditioning, about saying no to the role of the strong one, who carries everything in silence, about allowing myself to be seen, first by me, then by the world. This is the thesis life wanted me to defend, a thesis with no panel, no grade, no ceremony, but filled with truth. If the builder destroys your project, maybe it's time to build alone and create something so solid, so yours, that no one can ever tear it down again. And that's exactly what I did. Today, when I think about the moment of the attack, it doesn't hurt the same way anymore. It became a prologue, the opening paragraph of the new story I chose to tell. And if you somehow saw yourself in me, then maybe this is your time too, to start writing yours. For a long time, I lived not to bother anyone. I became the daughter who doesn't demand, the woman who never raises her voice, the professional who says yes before even understanding what's being asked. I became an expert in taking up as little space as possible, to the point of almost disappearing. And it was exactly in that almost that life shook me, in the unexpected violence, in the shard that tore my scalp, in the sound of the laptop breaking, and with it, all the false ideas I had about my emotional safety. Right then, there was no room left for illusions. My father didn't see me. My mother chose silence. And me? I almost accepted that as my fate, but something inside me resisted, a part still small, still fragile, but determined not to die invisible. I spent nights staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the fan, and asking myself what I was going to do next. I was scared of everything. Scared to leave, scared to stay, scared to try again. And above all, scared to realize I might truly be alone in the world. But the truth, and I discovered this little by little, is that there's a kind of solitude that doesn't destroy. It teaches. It shows you over time that there's no shame in starting from scratch. That rebuilding your life without applause might be the most honest way to exist. I left with no scene, no fight. I just left. Took what little I had, the documents saved to the cloud, some basic clothes, and a body tired of trying. I moved in with a friend who, even without understanding everything that was happening, still welcomed me with silence and warm tea. It was there, in that borrowed home, that I began writing a new thesis, not an academic one, not with bibliographic references, but an emotional one, a spiritual one, a sensitive one, a thesis about being, about learning to exist without having to prove anything to anyone. It took me weeks to stop apologizing for taking up space. It took me months to sleep without reliving that moment. But little by little, I gave myself new words. In place of leech, I wrote survivor. In place of you don't deserve it, I wrote you are alive. and for now, that's enough. I started working on smaller projects, took on freelance gigs that barely covered rent, but gave me freedom. I discovered I could be creative without fear, that I could say no and still be respected, that I didn't have to accept emotional crumbs just because that's all I had ever known. I also went back to studying, this time for myself. No thesis for approval, just learning for growth. Literature, psychology, philosophy, anything that reminded me the world was bigger than that house, than those voices, than those lies. Over time, I started meeting other people, women with similar stories, men who knew how to listen without interrupting, friends who didn't need an edited version of me to stay. I built a circle of affection, not grand, not perfect, but real. And in that space, I allowed myself to exist without masks. Returning to a life with dignity became the greatest project of my life. And that's what I want to leave here. Written, as the final paragraph of the thesis life asked me to defend. No one has the right to dim someone's light just because they can't face their own darkness, and no sentence spoken in a moment of cruelty holds more power than the decision to begin again. The attack was real, the pain was immense, but today, that pain doesn't define me, it revealed me. And if what you've read so far touched you, reminded you of something that lives silently inside you, then maybe this isn't just my story. Maybe it's a mirror, an invitation, not to forget what was done to you, but to remember who you are, beyond it. Because maybe the question is no longer, what thesis will you defend in college? But rather, what is the thesis your life is asking you to defend, right now? And the most beautiful part is, there's still time. There's always time. It's been 2 years since the day I left that house. 2 years since the blow, since the breaking point, since the last time I heard my father's voice, without it making my body shake. And sometimes I still ask myself, how can something that hurt so much have been the starting point for the life I have today? I moved to a smaller town, a place without so much rush, without so many memories. I rented a tiny studio with windows that opened to a quiet square. At night, I hear the soft steps of dry leaves being swept by the wind. During the day, the school bells nearby remind me that time keeps moving, even when we feel stuck inside. I work as a freelance writer now. I create content for small brands, write stories for other women, turn experiences into words. It's not fame, it's not glamour, but it's dignified. It's mine, and most importantly, it doesn't make my soul sick. My days smell of fresh coffee, the sound of keys tapping, and the warm touch of afternoon light pouring through the window. Sometimes it might seem small, but after living in fear of even my own reflection, peace tastes like a miracle. It wasn't quick, it wasn't easy. There were setbacks. There were days I cried, hugging my knees, missing even the things that hurt me, because familiarity can be addictive too. There were Sundays when I turned on my phone just to see if my mother had tried to reach out. And even if I didn't want to admit it, a part of me still hoped. But the silence remained. And in that silence, I rebuilt myself. I went to therapy, read books that taught me to name what I was feeling, met women who, like me, carried inherited wounds, not from a violent world, but from houses that pretended to be home. Women who were silenced, diminished, erased, and with them, I learned to speak, to claim space, to exist fully. It was at one of those gatherings, in a therapeutic writing group, that I met Joanna, a soft-spoken woman with eyes that looked like they had cried every ocean. She said a sentence I never forgot. Clara, sometimes we need to turn the page even when the other is still screaming on the last one. And that's exactly what I did. I turned the page, not to forget, but to keep going. Today, my routine is simple. I take care of my plants with the tenderness no one ever gave me. I write. I walk. Sometimes I dance alone in the living room to songs that soothe the heart, not just the ears. I've made new friends, people who know me without the filters of the past, people who don't call me strong as a compliment, but as a recognition. With time, I even relearned how to love. I met someone who listens with his whole body, who doesn't need to shrink me to feel complete. I'm still learning to trust, still afraid to fully surrender. But now, when fear shows up, I talk to it. I don't push it away. I don't hide it. I simply welcome it, because it's part of me, but it doesn't define me. Recently, I ran into my brother at a supermarket. He looked older, more worn out. We stared at each other for what felt like too long. There were no hugs, no apologies, just a nod. And strangely enough, it was enough. Later that same day, I received a short message from my mother. It said, "I thought of you today. I miss you." I didn't reply, not out of resentment, but because in that moment, I no longer needed to fill voids that weren't mine. I'm learning that not every bond needs to be rebuilt. Some just need to be respected at the point where they broke. And that's okay. My greatest lesson through all of this wasn't about forgiveness. It was about boundaries. It was about knowing that you can love someone and still choose not to be hurt by them. It was about realizing that true love begins when we stop abandoning ourselves just to avoid disappointing others. Sometimes I walk down the street and watch other women, sitting on buses, scrolling through their phones, chatting with friends, and I wonder how many of them carry stories they've never told. How many were told, like I was, that they were too dramatic. How many learn to be quiet? How many are still trying, every single day, to prove they deserve love? And it's for them, and for me, that I keep writing. Every sentence I write is an attempt to stitch together pieces that were once torn. Each text is an open door for someone on the other side, still trying to find a way out. Because what saved me wasn't the courage to start over. It was the decision to never abandon myself again. Today, my thesis isn't in any library, but it lives in the life I've built, in the bonds I've chosen, in the peace I've earned, and in every woman who reads my words and says, "It feels like you told my story." I don't know if my family will ever understand. Maybe they won't, but by now that doesn't matter so much anymore, because I understand. I understand that I wasn't weak for staying so long, and that I'm not selfish for having left. I'm human, and like every human being, I deserve respect. I deserve to be seen. I deserve to live without fear. So if you've stayed with me until now, if something inside your chest stirred as you read this, maybe this story is yours too. And if it is, let it carry you, because there is another side. There is a way out. There is life after the silence, and it's waiting for you. Returning home is one of the most ambiguous experiences a person can live. For those who had a home filled with affection, it's a reunion. For those who had a home of silent pain, it's facing ghosts. It took me more than a year to walk down the street where I grew up. Not because I was afraid of what could happen, but because I was afraid of what I might feel. I didn't want to meet the girl I used to be there. The girl who tried to seem invisible so as not to cause trouble. The one who shrank when she heard heavy footsteps in the hallway. The one who trembled every time someone said, "We need to talk." But one day, it happened. Unplanned. Unannounced. I was returning from an appointment and got lost due to a detour. And suddenly, there I was, standing in front of that green gate. Still the same. A bit more worn. The paint faded, but intact. I parked the car a little further ahead, left the engine running. My heart was racing. My hands started to sweat. I stared for a few minutes, and then I got out. I didn't go in. I didn't knock. I just stood there, on the sidewalk. I took a deep breath and looked up at the window of my old bedroom. There, against that wall, I had so many times wished to disappear. So many times I silently begged for someone to truly see me. I closed my eyes. I remembered the late nights I used to write in secret, the letters I never gave to anyone, the day I tore up my own diary out of fear someone might read it and say I was crazy, ungrateful, dramatic. I opened my eyes again. And then I noticed something simple, almost trivial, but immense. I didn't feel angry anymore. The hurt was still there. Yes, it still existed, but it was no longer corrosive. It didn't ache like before. It was like a well-treated scar, present, visible, but no longer limiting my movement. I turned around, got back in the car, and drove away. No tears, no plans to return, just the sense that, for the first time, I had come back and left on my own terms. This time, I didn't run away. This time, I left in peace. When someone wounds your heart while it's still forming, love becomes a difficult equation to solve. There's always that lingering doubt. How do you trust something that once tore you apart from the inside? It took me a long time to allow someone to truly get close. Before that, I had lukewarm relationships. Safe, predictable. People I chose not for what they awakened in me, but for what they didn't threaten. It was as if my entire selection process was built on one goal: avoid danger. And ironically, I ended up getting hurt more than once by relationships that promised calm, but delivered emotional distance. But then I met Daniel. It was in a small cafe, on a drizzly afternoon. We were sitting at neighboring tables. I was typing on my laptop. He was reading a navy blue book. At some point, he asked if he could share the outlet. I nodded yes without even really looking up. But after that, small, careful conversations started to happen. First about coffee, then literature, then silence. Daniel was the opposite of what I expected. He wasn't intense. He wasn't invasive. He listened patiently. His gaze didn't try to pierce. It tried to hold. It took me weeks to accept his dinner invitation. And even after that, I still caught myself testing his limits, pulling away, creating distance, waiting for him to give up. But he didn't. And he didn't pressure me either. He simply stayed. One day, without meaning to, I cried in front of him. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't planned. We were sitting on the couch, talking about movies, when he asked me a simple question. Did you have a happy childhood? My throat closed up. I tried to give a light answer, but the moment he placed his hand over mine, firm, quiet, something in me gave way. I cried like a child, and for the first time, someone didn't run. He didn't tell me everything would be okay. He just stayed. It wasn't love at first sight. It was love built over time. Love made of listening. Love made of unlearning and relearning. Daniel showed me that true love doesn't come to fix your past. It comes to show you that your past doesn't have to define your present, that it's possible to be cared for without having to shrink yourself. That affection can be firm without being violent. That presence can be constant without being controlling. I began to understand that trauma doesn't disappear when we love again, but it transforms. It takes on other shapes, other names, and the body learns, slowly, that now it's safe, that now it can relax, that now it can love, not out of fear, but with openness. I still have triggers. I still have days when I shut down, but now I know how to come back. I know how to name what I feel. I know I am heard. Loving after trauma is like relearning how to breathe. At first it hurts, but then, it's like opening the windows after years in a dark room. The light stings, but it also warms, and you realize that despite everything, you still know how to live. It didn't happen in a therapy session. It wasn't in a romantic embrace. Not even in some compliment someone gave me. It was in a simple scene. Unexpected. The most ordinary of situations. And maybe that's why it was so powerful. It was a regular Tuesday. I was working at a co-working space near home, trying to finish an article that just wouldn't flow. My mind was foggy, tired, those old voices echoing again. You're slow. You never finish anything. You're always putting things off, always running away. I ordered a coffee, sat outside where the sun warmed my legs with a soft heat, and then she came. Anna, one of the staff at the co-working space, always kind, always discreet. She approached slowly, holding the cup in her hand. And before placing it on the table, she looked at me for just a second longer than usual. One of those moments so subtle, it usually goes unnoticed. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Just a little stuck today," I replied, trying to smile. She hesitated, then set the coffee down in front of me and said, with a gentle firmness, "Your face looks more serious than usual today. It's not just about work, is it?" In that moment, something in me gave way. She didn't know me deeply. She didn't know my story. But she saw me. She saw me. And it was like a crack opening in the concrete I'd been stuck in for days. Not because of the question itself, but because she didn't shy away from the discomfort. Because for a moment, someone looked at me beyond the role, beyond the function, beyond the mask. I wrapped my hands around the warm cup, felt my eyes sting. I didn't cry, but I took a deep breath, like someone receiving permission to simply be. After that day, I started to notice more. The small ways we are seen, or ignored, throughout life. In the way someone holds a door, in how they ask, "How are you?" and actually wait for a real answer. In the gaze that stays present, even when the conversation slows down. For a long time, I thought being truly seen required full exposure, that you had to tell everything, bare your wounds, turn pain into confession. But no, sometimes being seen happens in silence, in the pause, in the kind of presence that doesn't judge, in the sensitivity of someone who notices, even without understanding everything. Being seen was the beginning of healing, because that's when I started to see myself too, not just as a survivor, but as someone who feels, who thinks, who needs to pause, as someone whole, even if patched together. And since then, I began doing the same for others, looking more, listening with my whole body, being fully present. Because deep down, we all carry a silent desire that at some point, someone will truly see us, not as a reflection of their expectations, but as we really are. On that random Tuesday, at a random table, in a random place, I was seen, and I never hid from myself again. For many years, my body was a house in a state of alert, as if an invisible alarm was always about to go off. I walked hunched, with tense shoulders, clenched jaw, and a stomach always slightly knotted, as if something could happen at any moment. And the saddest part, I thought that was normal. I only realized the weight I was carrying in my body when a friend invited me to a conscious breathing class. It was in a small room, wooden floors, open windows, a faint scent of incense. There were no miraculous promises, just an instructor with a soft voice saying, "We're just going to breathe," with attention, with presence, without hurry. The proposal seemed simple, but the moment I closed my eyes, I felt a massive weight. Breathing with awareness was like turning on the lights in a basement I had always kept dark. With each inhale, memories surfaced. With each exhale, attempts to let go. My body trembled, my hands sweated, my throat tightened, as if old words wanted to come out. And at a certain moment, I heard a sentence in my head, like an ancestral whisper. "It's not safe here." It wasn't the room. It was me. My body didn't trust me. And how could it? After all the times I pushed it into situations that hurt. After all the times I silenced it. Ignored it, forced it to stay where it ached, just to keep up appearances. That class changed everything, not because it was perfect, but because it revealed something fundamental. I needed to relearn how to inhabit my body. I started slowly, waking up more gently, placing my feet on the ground before reaching for my phone, feeling the water in the shower like a hug, not a chore. Eating slowly, listening to what the body asked for. Rest, silence, movement. That's when I realized just how much of my story was written in my muscles, in my shallow breathing, in the chronic headaches, in the anxiety that appeared without warning. And little by little, I started speaking to it, thanking it for carrying me this far. Even tired, even wounded, the body is wise. It doesn't forget, but it forgives. if we learn how to care for it. Today, I still have days of tension, but now I know how to recognize them. I breathe, I close my eyes, I place my hand over my chest and say, "It's okay, you are safe." And that sentence, which once was just an attempt, is now true. My body has learned to breathe again, and with every breath, it reminds me that healing doesn't happen only in the mind, but even under abandonment, life went on. Even without care, something insisted on growing. Even carrying the weight of pain, the earth kept its ability to nourish, and one day, without you expecting it, your feet chose to return there, first with fear, then with curiosity, and as you stepped onto that forgotten ground, you felt the scent of damp memory, the sound of dry leaves cracking underfoot, the vivid presence of everything you once tried to forget. Little by little, you start to clear it. You remove the dead branches, you pull out the weeds that fed on your fear, and deep down, between cracks and twisted roots, you find something unexpected, a living sprout, small but alive. It grew there, alone, without direct sun, without enough water, without applause. It survived, and now, with your hands, it can bloom. That sprout is the part of you that never gave up, the part that waited in silence, the part that resisted when everything around you whispered, "Give up." You don't have to fix everything at once. The garden won't be magical tomorrow, but it's enough to care for that one sprout, just that one, and the rest will come, with time, with sunlight, with love. The beauty is in understanding that, even under the emotional concrete of violence, denial, and humiliation, life was waiting. The seed was holding on. Blooming was still possible. You are the garden. You are the soil and the flower. You are the abandonment. But now, you are also the gardener, and that changes everything. Some wounds don't end with a scream. They end with silence. Not the kind of silence that shuts you down, but the kind that closes. The silence that comes after the final attempt, after the last explanation, after the last unanswered hope. Ending a destructive cycle isn't about making peace with what hurt you. It's about accepting that the apology may never come. It's about realizing the justice you dreamed of won't arrive in the shape you imagined. And still, you go on. Still, you stop bleeding for a wound the other never cared to heal. Destructive cycles don't end with force. They dissolve the moment you stop moving inside them. They only exist because you keep spinning with them, even when you're exhausted. They survive on the same unanswered questions. Why did he treat me like that? What did I do wrong? Will she ever understand? But then comes the moment you set those questions down on the table, not to dismiss them, but because you no longer need the answers to keep going. You learn to say enough without anger, to say no without shouting, to close the door without waiting for anyone to follow. And this might be the hardest freedom to reach. The freedom of no longer needing to be understood by the one who hurt you. Breaking the cycle is no longer trying to prove your truth to someone who always reduced you to being too much. It's understanding that your worth isn't defined by the one who denied you love, but by who you become when you choose to love yourself. You begin to recognize the old scripts, the conversation that always ends the same way, the gesture that looks like affection but comes laced with poison, the memory that insists on repainting the past in soft tones, when you know it hurt more than they'll ever admit. And so, you choose another path. A path where you no longer need to convince anyone that your pain is real, because now, your pain is sacred, and what is sacred isn't up for debate, it's honored. You'll start noticing the signs that you're breaking free, when you stop justifying yourself, when his name no longer makes you tremble, when her absence stops being a void and becomes a memory, when you can smile without asking for permission. Ending a destructive cycle doesn't mean forgetting what happened. It means stripping it of the power it had over who you are, and in that closing, something opens, a void, yes, but a fertile one, ready to be inhabited by new choices, by clean connections, by a life that's no longer a reaction to what hurt you, but an expression of what heals you. There comes a point in healing when the past no longer screams, it whispers, and you hear it, but you no longer respond. It was at that point I realized I was returning to myself, not with fanfare, not with grand gestures, but with small habits that only make sense to someone who spent years trying to please everyone but herself. I stopped apologizing for existing. I started choosing who deserved to share my silences. I traded the hunger for intensity, for the gentleness of the everyday. I stopped needing everything to have an ending, and began to accept what comes and goes, and above all, to honor what stays. It was in that state of delicate reconstruction that the unexpected happened. Not like lightning splitting the sky, but like a warm breeze at the end of the day. I was in a bookstore, one of those that also serves coffee, with the scent of old wood and background music that feels like it's made to carry memories. I was holding a book with a soft blue cover, flipping through its pages slowly, touching the paper like someone touches forgotten skin. And then I heard a man's voice, steady but unrushed. That book changes meaning on the second read. I turned. A man, maybe a few years older than me, unshaven, eyes that looked like they'd seen too much. much, and still chose to remain kind. I smiled with the corner of my mouth, not at what he said, but at how he said it, with presence, without intrusion. And why would someone read a book again if they already know how it ends? I asked, still holding it in my hands. He shrugged, leaning against the shelf, because what changes isn't the ending, it's who you are when you read it the second time. That sentence stayed on my skin for days, and the truth is, he was right. I went back to the bookstore a few days later. He was there. Same corner, different book, same eyes. We pretended it was coincidence. Maybe it was. We sat together, 2 nearby tables, 2 cups of coffee, 2 stories not trying to merge, but quietly listening to each other. He told me his name was Raphael, that he had worked for years in architecture, but now he drew maps for publishing houses, maps of places that don't exist, but that, for him, always could. I like the idea of giving shape to imaginary worlds, he said. I laughed. And I like the idea of building a world I can finally live in, for the first time. That's when I understood. Maybe love doesn't need to come as a solution. Maybe it's simply a space to be, to breathe, to laugh at a silly sentence, to share silence without rushing to fill it. I didn't tell him my whole story, but he saw me, not as a victim, not as a heroine, just as someone here, trying. And that was more than enough. We kept meeting, walks on slow afternoons with no destination, talks about books, music, fears, and always his way, of never rushing anything, of never trying to fix what he didn't even know was broken. One night, walking down a cobblestone street, he said, "You know what I admire most about you?" "What?" I asked. "The silence between one sentence and the next. You don't rush to fill anything. That shows you've learned to listen to yourself." I went quiet. He smiled. And right there, in that brief instant, I knew. I no longer needed to fear being seen. Because now, I see myself. Raphael didn't come to save me. He came to walk beside me, and there's a world of difference between those two things. I don't know where this will lead. I don't know if it will last forever, but I know I'm present. And for someone like me, that means everything. The cycle doesn't end when someone loves you. It ends when you allow yourself to be loved without hiding, without bargaining, without tucking your pieces away, without shrinking yourself just to fit. And then, something new begins. Something that can't be explained, but that pulses, that breathes, that stays. It's not the end of the story. It's the beginning of a chapter I spent years believing I didn't deserve to write. And now, with the pen in my hands and a heart no longer in a hurry, I write. With tenderness, with pause, with presence, with love. And what if everything you've lived through until now wasn't a mistake? What if the chaos was soil? What if abandonment was an opening? What if the pain was a portal? What if life, despite everything, never left you behind, but was simply waiting for you to come home to yourself? I took time to understand, time to choose myself. But one day, the sound of my own voice, even trembling, was louder than their echo. And that day, everything began. Now, when I look in the mirror, I see marks, but I see a path. I see strength. I see truth. And maybe you're there now, listening, feeling something stir inside, a memory, a knot, a desire to leave or to finally come back to yourself. So let me tell you one last thing. With all the love it took me a lifetime to learn how to give, you are not broken. You are becoming. You are not what they did to you. You are what you choose to do with it now. The world doesn't need you to be perfect. It just needs you to be alive, present, whole, even if in pieces. Close your eyes, breathe. You made it this far, and that alone is already a beginning.